No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about accountability.
Yes, one of my most favorite topics that we get to talk about.
Yeah, I like it too. I'm working with some clients right now who are going through, annual review and, appraisal processes, stuff like that. And, there seems to be this kind of these vast differences from organization to organization when it comes to how much of the annual review or appraisal process is rooted in, finite scorecarding versus other elements. And then even with the organizations that use scorecards for a lot of this accountability, there are also differences in terms of what makes up those scorecards. Is it a person's individual results versus is it the organization's results or the location's results? And there's all these differences. And so it's making me think, what is it that makes organizations decide what is important in order to, put these things on a review or an appraisal, or that can impact the potential annual raise that a employee gets. And in some organizations, there's an inherent sense that, okay, this seems pretty fair to me. And in other organizations, it seems like this doesn't seem very fair. This seems kind of arbitrary, or like the employees don't have a lot of control over this. Have you seen differences like this before? And have you ever seen an accountability type system where you look at it and go, what does that even do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting you bring it up, because I think that in some industries and businesses, there's a bottom line, and if most people are either assessed or bonused on, or, reviews are based on the bottom line, that makes a lot of sense. But then there's also this element of behavior, and there's an element of subjective opinion when it comes to leaders, and when it comes to like talent assessment and everything from like 9-box, to 360 assessments to whatever it might be. So there's always this, I think, discussion or dialogue on how much of this assessment or how much of this review process is based upon actual data and numbers. And then to your point, is it based on the individual or a team or the organization? Mm-hmm. And then how are we looking at, the behaviors that we see? And if they're not behaviors that are easy to look at, something like safety, or like, the amount of errors you've had if you work in data analytics and all that type of stuff, but it's just actual observable behaviors, that's where it also gets a little bit tricky. So I think it's one of those things where I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it places where it's like, here's the numbers and this is what we are responsible for, and if we are all good, then we're rated. We rate ourselves as good or great. Right. If we're not, then we're not. And then I've seen it where it's just 100% subjective behavioral opinions of leaders, where there's no real data because of the industry or the space, where it's hard to connect an actual data point to an individual.
Yeah, this is a tough one for a lot of organizations, because I think there's this kind of drive to make things as objective as possible, as much as possible, in as many areas as possible. And the reason why there's that goal is because the goal is to make sure that no employee feels like, oh, the reason why I got less or more than somebody else, or why this person got promoted and I didn't, or I got it and they didn't, the reason why is because they like me better, or they like them better. And if they want to make sure that it's rooted in, no, the reason why this person got more or less or whatever is because they did this, and this, and you did this, and this. And they want to make it quantifiable so that it's easy to say to an employee, if you want this too, this is what you should do. And I love that. I love the idea of being able to say that. However, there are a lot of things that you can't quantify that way, and that should go into the process of accountability. That you can't make objective. There's always going to be some subjectivity. So clearly the solution is for there to be some balance of the two. There has to be something objective, almost like cost of admission things, and there has to be some subjectivity to it, because at the end of the day, you have to there's elements that are not quantifiable on an Excel spreadsheet that go into how you would rate an employee overall when it comes to, are they doing their job right? I look back at at times where I've worked in organizations where the revenue that we were bringing in was really heavily weighted on whatever the scorecard was, and always noticing that stores that had only been open for a year or less were always at the top of these scorecards. And the reason why is because there was no previous year's performance to go against. So their budgets were not based on anything rooted in history. They were just based on what do we think this brand new store is going to do. And so when they crushed it, and they were always, like the top stores in the organization, there was this sense of like, well, of course they're the top stores. The budgets that they were given were really easy because there was no data to tell what they should be. And now all of a sudden we're hyping these locations up as, wow, they're really killing it. It's like, well, are they? Well, let's see them do it next year, and then let's see how that works. It's almost like there should have been this like, during the first year, you don't get to be a part of the scorecard, or you have a separate scorecard that it's just for stores that are new and everybody else is together. That seemed like it would have been a little bit more fair at the time. But I get it. This isn't an easy thing for organizations to do, hence why we're talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that it's, could it have been adjusted and made easier? Absolutely. And that's kind of how I look at it, is when you see something like that, and I witnessed it too. I can probably name some stores by name that I remember. And then the ongoing joke was, if you were in leadership, it was like, go open a new store and then get out before the end of the first year, right? Because like that was the whole thing. Like, get out of there before you have to do it again the next year.
Sure.
But that's a reality. But at the same point, I mean, you called out the solve. The company could have said, you know what, like, this clearly doesn't make any sense. It's not fair in regards to like what we're looking to do, and we have to figure out a better way to make this more comparable. If we're going to do things like reward teams with, whether it's bonuses or trips or even banners or recognition, even, these things are parts of our culture we need to be, conscious of. We need to make adjustments for. And I think in the perfect world, if you're looking to have to review people or have a part of their behaviors be a part of providing them with, again, recognition or accountability, in those environments, I think the best thing to do is try to spread out the subjective opinion to be more about the team and those that work with one another than so much one individual leader or a collection of leaders. So what I mean by that is, how powerful would it be if once a month, you and I work together on the same team, we're peers in the workplace, and we get a survey for everybody on our team. And it's like just 5 questions. And it's like, hey, is blank, so is Chris, a great resource for you when you have questions, 1 through 5? Is Chris, approachable with a positive demeanor? And you base these questions on maybe the values of the company, whatever you want. But you make this about there being an element of how we show up for each other at work, but also knowing that like you're not always going to connect with people the same, and you're not always going to have relationships where, I might say Chris is like all 5s. I enjoy Chris. We have a lot of fun. It's great. We connect well. We help each other. Somebody else might be like, well, I think Chris is a 5 here. He's a 3 here. Maybe, we don't have enough in common. So maybe approachable. He's a 2. So then you kind of have some of these averages, and then you have this aggregate of how we show up for each other in the workplace. And then you layer that on top of what a leader does, and like, what does a leader think? And you kind of build this whole system that allows somebody to not only feel, appreciated for the work that they do, but also when you find these themes where like, wow, like, Chris's approachability score is a 2 out of 5. As the leader, let me go talk to Chris, and let me just go say, hey, let's look at the data. This is kind of anonymous, but like, here's what it is. Let's work through this together. From an accountability standpoint, now you're also layering in this idea that it's about the team. It's about our culture. It's not just one person's subjective opinion. And of course, the leader should have a good amount of that responsibility. But I just think that when we're talking about the subjective part of this, there's a much better way that organizations can do this.
I agree with that. It's almost like if you invest money for retirement, you don't put it all in the S&P. You invest in a lot of different places. You have 10% here, 10% there, 20% here, 20% there. You move things around so that any one thing doesn't have complete control over your future, your destiny. This is the exact same thing. If you are trying to make it so accountability is rooted in one or two things only, even from a standpoint of trying to make it simple, what you're doing is incentivizing the people who know how to move numbers around in that particular area and who don't know how to move it around in other areas. If you make it a dynamic, and if you make it to where a lot of different elements go in to accountability, then it becomes a lot more difficult to manage it from a standpoint of how do I maximize my scores, and it becomes the easier way to do it is to actually just be good at it. It's if all it is based on a single scorecard or a single set of numbers, the time and effort it takes to game that system in order to make those numbers the best oftentimes is less effort than it would take to actually do the job right. But if you diversify it and if you make it kind of spread out over a lot of different things, where part of it's scorecards, part of it is what your people are actually saying about you, and you roll all these things in together, then the easier thing to do is to just be a good leader and to be a good employee and to do things right and to reach out for help if you need help to be able to do it right. That's a lot less stressful and a lot easier than trying to figure out, how do I make sure I get the best numbers on this particular scorecard, because that's all the scorecards incentivize if that's all you have. We like Gallup a lot here, and they're fantastic in terms of looking at data. Gallup organization said that about a fifth of employees feel like that the metrics that are measured for their accountability have an influence over their actual performance, meaning that it's within their control. And I thought that was interesting, because that means that if you're being measured on something, but you feel like you have no control over it, really that seems like a recipe for disaster in terms of employee engagement. If I feel like I have no control over what's going to be talked to me about how good of an employee I was for the year, meaning let's say that I'm an outside sales consultant and I don't even talk to other employees. I'm just doing this one thing, but I'm not commission based. I'm bonus based, and it's based on the entire organization as a whole. What did we all do together? It's like, well, how does that incentivize me to do any better? Like what it incentivizes me to do is either think highly or think poorly of my coworkers who I don't even interact with, because now I feel like they're now more in control of whether or not I bonused or got any type of incentive over what my base salary was. And that's no way to manage people.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call. And it's so funny to think about, how people feel about what is being measured and the influence that it has on their behaviors. And, you said it a little bit earlier, and I think it was the second episode of the show when we talked a little bit about, was it when the
result is more important than the behavior? Yeah.
Exactly. The behavior. Yeah.
Yep.
And we laughed about it and we talked about it and we had these stories, because that's what ends up happening when you start to just say, like, these outcomes are the sole thing that we look at or measure when it comes to how we define success. Well, then you find people that get creative with how do we make adjustment to that outcome, and how do we make it work that we want, the way that we want it to work. And then that's how you start to end up creating bad behaviors and that type of thing. And so I think it's such an important call out, and something that I think organizations, like, again, this is another space where working with people to understand how they see the work and then how it's measured, and how they connect some of those dots is a critical part of creating a system that allows you to assess people appropriately for both their individual performance, and even if it's a part of a team, along with their behaviors and what they are doing to represent the brand or to become more efficient in their role, and make that subjective element, again, a little bit more spread. So I just think that there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, just in general, because if you look at, a lot of the people that we know in a lot of different industries, in a lot of different places, it sounds like it's been the same type of thing for a lot of years, which is never good, because then it feels like the way in which we're assessing talent and doing these things is not progressing the same way that people are expecting it to.
Right. I think, in a lot of places now, what's happening is accountability is becoming more solutions focused rather than scorecard focused. And what that means basically is that if an employee and a leader sit down together and talk about where the shortcomings are, and then they talk about what can be done in order to improve those, And then the accountability is based on what did the behavior change in a way that both the leader and the employee agreed upon as what needs to happen in order to improve that metric or whatever that is. And so it goes back to the whole, it's not that the scorecard doesn't matter. It's that the scorecard isn't the thing. The scorecard is just what to look at in order to start with how you got to the thing, which is the behavior. And behavior is really hard to measure. You just have to watch it. The scorecard should let you know in general, where should I start looking at behaviors? But it's not the thing to hang your hat on. It's the thing to look at and go, all right, based on these numbers, I should probably be looking in these areas to try to see whether or not there are issues or not. And then when you talk to the employees and you can look at where the scorecards are not where they need to be, they're not accountable to what that number is on the scorecard. What they're accountable to is, all right, this is what we think you should be doing in order to get that number higher. But again, all I want to see is that these behaviors are happening. And if you and I can agree that these behaviors are not happening right now, and in areas where I see the scorecard doing really well, the employees are doing these things, then we can assume that there's probably a correlation there. And if you start doing these behaviors, then the scorecard may or may not jump up at the same level. It might take time. But again, I'm not worried about the scorecard. I'm worried about what the behaviors are. So I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch what you're doing and how you're actually performing. And we're going to talk again about whether or not you did these things that we agreed on were necessary in order to move things forward. And if you're doing these behaviors well every time, but the scorecard's not moving up as quickly, that's fine. But the behavior is there. However, if the scorecard's moving up, but the behavior isn't there, then we can assume that the uptick in the scorecard had nothing to do with what you were doing, which means why should you get credit for it? You're doing nothing differently, and yet the scorecard is fluctuating. Why should you be A, held accountable to that, or B, given accolades for that? The behavior should be what matters, and the scorecard merely validates it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. If you have been in the workforce for 10 years or more, you undoubtedly have been in a situation where you felt like an appraisal or a review or something you were held accountable for wasn't fair. In your own mind, you were thinking, there was nothing I could do to control this, or this was somebody else's doing. And you may be right or you may be wrong, but it doesn't matter. The feeling is what matters here. And no employee should feel that way. And so if you're a leader of people and you're going to be talking to people about what their performance looks like and what they're going to be held accountable to, you need to make sure that all those conversations are rooted in things that you have actually observed with them, what they've actually done that you can watch or talk to, and you've written down notes about what you can speak to them about, not based on what some downloadable Excel spreadsheet says. Because if you're rooting it in that, what you're saying to your employees is, I don't actually care enough about this to watch what you're doing or to help you improve. I care about telling you where you have fallen short and then expecting you to figure out the solution of how to not fall short anymore. And if an employee is falling short because they don't know how to do the things that you're expecting them to do, that doesn't feel very good, and they won't be able to solve the problem on their own. And if the employee is doing everything right and not getting the scorecard they're looking for, that will give them the inherent sense of complete helplessness. I have no control over my destiny here. And so root everything that you're talking to them about in actual observable behaviors, what they have done right, what they've not done right, what they're expected to do in the future, and then let the scorecards fall where they may and be able to speak to the fact that if the scorecard wasn't where it needs to be, that you're confident that if you keep doing what you're supposed to be doing, it will get there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great hack. And for those that maybe don't use scorecard in your vernacular, it's any way in which you measure success in your business or the results and outcomes that you look at with your team, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly. I just wanted to clarify that because I know that we have a lot of different listeners and people are like, "What are you talking about? Scorecards?" But it's a great hack and it's just a reminder of the responsibility of leadership and are we looking through the lens of helping people become better at what they do, and if that's the case, then the time that we spend with them will be very helpful in observing behaviors and helping them down the path of success.
Right, and this is not easy to do. If you're a leader, it's much easier to say, I'm just going to sit back, not engage as much because I know that the scorecard or report or downloadable Excel spreadsheet that tells me what my people are doing, I can just go by that and see where my employees are doing well, where they're not doing well. It's even harder if you lead remotely, because how do you observe what people are doing when you are not even with them all the time? This is going to take effort, but if you are owning your responsibility as a leader to make sure that people are held accountable for the right things and not the wrong things, this needs to be a significant portion of your job, is being able to figure out, are people being held accountable for things that A, they have control over, and B, they feel like they have control over, and how to fix if there's a problem.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.